Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. It's Monday, the 28th January 2013. Welcome to UK Column Live. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
You nearly forgot my name.
I had to look, actually, but I got there in the end. Well, it's pretty cold and chilly in Plymouth, England. It's overcast. There's a pretty cold southwest wind. I think the temperature's around about 3 degrees. And of course, we've had a mixture of very heavy rain over the weekend and a bit of sunshine and a bit of cold. So pretty much it's England at its best. And of course, we'll come on to the weather in a minute because the government's going to use the rotten English weather as an excuse to deter people from entering Britain. That's a pretty cunning tactic. So lots happening at the moment. And as usual, we're going to try and unravel the truth behind the politics. So we better start with the attempted coup on David Cameron. I think we had another picture actually before this one,
yes,
doesn't it?
You didn't need to.
Well, the Telegraph, that'll do.
Yeah.
Well, here we are. Out of nowhere, we've suddenly got an article talking about this gentleman. He's the Tory MP for Windsor, Adam Alfreli, if I've pronounced his surname correctly. And over the weekend, there was a lot in the papers about the fact that there'd been a particularly sinister challenge to David Cameron. And what's interesting about this gentleman is really hasn't got a background as such, except that for some reason he was given the safest Tory seat in the country. And he says he's post-racial, so he doesn't believe in any form of identity from your background. Presumably he's heading towards the post-democratic era, but he's giving Cameron a shake-up by saying, I'm coming after your seat. So the Mail picked up on this as well. And of course the thing that we need to be aware of is that this man is a multi-millionaire. He's worth about 100 million. Here's a picture of him. On the left with his very attractive young wife. Traditionally, she's a barrister, so she's straight out of the legal world. And we were very interested with the photograph here because, of course, he's put in stunning colour with the lady in the red dress, whereas on the right we see a very drab and dowdy David Cameron and his wife. So we wonder whether what we're watching is start of a media coup. Is this man to be trusted? Well, we're told he's a self-made man, but with 100 million in the bank, I think he's probably closer to the bankers than he is to ordinary people. So if we just have a little bit of a look about what he's been up to. Wikipedia talks about his activities with this company, de Havilland, Definitive Political Intelligence. This is a very, very interesting organisation that says it's providing information for charities and companies. I picked up on their charity page here because it's addressing charities as if they are big businesses, which is probably quite accurate. And where does this little outfit hang out? Well, they share premises with the Top Right group. And I'll leave viewers to do their own research into what this lobbying organisation is about. But we just thought it was interesting to say that this guy's been connected to that. Moving on, the Lords is going to get 50 new peers. I think you picked up on this one, Mike.
Yeah, so yes, despite the fact that we have dropped the whole Lords reform business, this article really is an attempt, I believe, to get people wound up on this issue again. So 50 new peers, despite the fact that Cameron and Clegg have promised to reduce it to 450. So 50 new people that are party political in the sense of being appointed by Cameron, Clegg or Miliband. And they'll go in and they'll talk about things in the House of Lords. But in the meantime, Clegg is still in the background with this House of Lords reform that he still needs to push through because he's been tasked with all kinds of constitutional reform, and that's part and parcel of it. And so this article, I believe, is just designed to get it back into the public awareness and sort of get the idea among the public that really it's ridiculous that there are more and more Lords appointed every year.
And we need to cut them.
And what do they do anyway?
Yeah, we need to cut them. So we're looking at spin, propaganda and spin, and of course, mentioning that subject, we should also mention ice cream. So we just like to remind you about this lady here. We're just going to call her the ice cream salesman, but this is the new speechwriter for David Cameron. And one of our viewers did some homework on Friday and thought we'd like to know that, amongst other things, she's written some pretty amazing articles about the obscenely rich Russians who are now living in London. So we wonder whether there's any connection now between the leadership of the Tory party and obscenely rich Russians. But anyway, the main theme is ice cream. So we understand what's happening, I think. The Mail here is getting more into the depths of things with yet another article talking about office narcissists and psychopaths. It's quite an interesting article. It's talking about the fact that in the average business we are seeing more and more people with a supposedly psychopathic personality rising to the surface. I think correctly we should be saying that they are in fact low empathy people, but the Mail article simply focuses on business. We simply would like to ask at the moment what happens when these sorts of people move into positions of power in government. What is going to happen if we end up with psychopaths in power?
Have we not already?
I think we have.
Yeah.
Eric Pickles.
Speaking of psychopaths. Potentially.
Potentially.
So anyway, Eric Pickles is saying why councils should heed our quiet revolution. So this is an article that he has written for The Telegraph. And he's saying, across the country, a quiet revolution is underway. We have devolved powers and devolved finances to local government, so people have more flexibility than ever to transform their services. And he goes on to say, but our quiet revolution is overturning the established order of things. Localism won't give councils any excuse to shirk their responsibilities. Increasingly, it won't be decisions taken by the centre that determine what authorities get, but decisions made locally. Of course, what he's really saying, if you read what he says, read his entire article, what he's really saying is that the councils are required to take their instructions. Yes, they've been given devolved power and devolved finances, but actually they've been given their agenda from central government and the devolution is there because it's really getting them to implement the central agenda.
It's getting central power down to a lower level.
Absolutely.
So he's stripping away rights and freedoms from people, but of course if you're in a dictatorship, and certainly if there's any hint of psychopaths in power, what you're going to do while you do the dirty deed is you're going to lie. So that's exactly what the Conservative government is doing at the moment. They're building a dictatorship. The three parties are in fact one. And if we need any form of clue, perhaps we should look at what the Mail said over the weekend, where it ran quite a big articles on Tony Blair. And here he is, just to remind ourselves of what this man looks like. And in the article, Tony Blair is saying that he agrees with 90% of what David Cameron says on Europe. So David Cameron lying to the British public by saying that he's going to give a referendum on Europe, when in fact he's delaying it day by day. And of course, what's the agenda to lock us into that European superstate whilst lying that you're not doing what you really are. So to see Tony Blair totally aligning himself to Cameron, we're now beginning to get the picture. But we can get in a bit deeper because the other man whose name's cropped up in the news is this guy, David Laws. And of course, people remember him for losing his job fairly rapidly as a result of fiddling expenses. We just have a look at what his father said about him, let alone anybody else. I'm ashamed of my cabinet minister's son, father of disgraced David Laws said. The Lib Dem deserves to be in jail. So his own father says this man needs to be in jail. So David Laws' father, Tony, is embarrassed for his son after an expenses scandal that destroyed several MPs' reputations. It was revealed Laws had been guilty of a serious expenses fiddle. Most people would consider that to be fraud, totalling £50,000 and involving his secret gay lover. Laws and his father have not spoken in 15 years, but I have to say I'd be delighted to meet his father and probably to shake his hand. So what is David Laws up to at the moment? Well, here he is. We should remind ourselves that he's a former JP Morgan banker, although many people would say once a banker, always a banker. He's been involved with the Quad, which is the secret group where David Cameron, George Osborne, Nick Clegg and Danny Alexander meet to discuss high-level policy. Mr. Laws is also involved in cabinet meetings. He's also got a big foot in the pond, if that's the correct expression, with the Department of Education and Michael Gove. So he's close to children. And of course, the other thing that is going on at the moment is that Nick Clegg has got this man writing the Lib Dem election manifesto. So presumably we can see the Lib Dems proposing yet more fiddling of expenses as a key part of their manifesto. If that's not bad enough, we've got further attempts to shut down common law justice and juries. And of course the man behind that is Kenneth Clarke. But this MP, Tory Andrew Tyrie, has been speaking out on the Secret Courts Bill. And if we have a look at what people are talking about, this is a CPS report, which sounds good on the outside. It says that if the bill is passed in its current form, individuals may be less willing to provide information to authorities, and in an environment characterised by distrust, secret justice, and the risk of cover-ups of government wrongdoing. So the CPS there seems to have got a good handle on what's actually going on in the world of law and the courts. It goes on, judges should have a greater discretion to decide whether or not there's something not quite right in that text, closed material procedure is held, and that there should be a sunset clause to limit the life of the legislation to 5 years, ensuring that Parliament reviews it. So what I think is going on here is that we've got a debate over bringing in the secret courts. This is softening up the public to getting used to the idea that we're going to have more and more hearings in secret, where of course the government can cover up more and more of the criminal agenda. And Kenneth Clarke, of course, is the man who is driving this agenda through. If you're going to do something dirty, you want to do it in the dark. And that probably we could sum up quite nicely with the CIA and rendition flights.
Well, this is not so much rendition flights, but again linked to the courts, because in the United States at the moment, so-called 9/11 conspirators, we know that they weren't, claim that they were tortured while in CIA prisons, and they've asked a US military judge to order that the prisons to be preserved as evidence. And really, the reason that I found this article interesting is this notion that they have to ask for permission. So you've got a defence, you go into court in order to give that defence, but some of the key evidence is in the process of being destroyed by the people that are prosecuting you, and you have to ask permission from the judge to have that evidence preserved. That seems like there isn't much justice in those tribunals.
Well, maybe we can quote a bit from Ken Clarke here. We just jump back on what this man's doing. Ken Clarke says that this bill will allow light to be shone on material that's currently kept in the dark. It will allow for cases to be heard where there's currently no means of hearing them. So according to Ken Clarke, if you don't have a jury, if you don't allow the public to know what's going on behind closed doors and you don't let the press in, this is equivalent to bringing it into the light. It will allow judges to examine national security sensitive material and establish the truth, which is just not possible at present. This should give the public greater confidence that the intelligence services are being held to account. So according to Ken Clarke, white is black and black is white. But ultimately, if you're going to run a dictatorship in the Soviet Union or East Germany or China, the most important thing is that there is no justice and there are certainly no juries. Well done, Ken. There's been a little bit creeping in about the fact that later on this year borders are going to be opened, freely open to Romanians and Bulgarians, and the government at the moment is trying to tell us that we are not going to see a huge influx of more people, placing further pressure on
Creaking infrastructure.
Thank you. So there's a lot of waffle generally being put in the press about that. We're going to have a lot of people, no we aren't, they will come, they won't come. Lots of emotive pictures of people here at the UK Border Agency. And remember, we've already identified that a lady called Lynn Homer, Common Purpose graduate, did a fine job of destroying elections in Birmingham and did a similar job of destroying the competency of the UK Border Agency. But the government's cunning plan to deter Romanians and Bulgarians, which this Guardian article picks up on, is that they're going to be told the weather is particularly cold and unpleasant in England, and therefore they probably wouldn't want to come here. So is this straight out of a sort of Private Eye skit article, or is this a children's comic? It seems to me that the government has now finally decided we are idiots. And what's the temperature in the winter in Romania? Pretty cold, I think, isn't it?
At least -30 generally.
And Bulgaria. Yeah. So somebody's got it wrong. It isn't us, so it must be the government. What's really happening, of course, is that by bringing in more unvetted people from Eastern Europe and particularly encouraging them to join the police force, we've taken yet another step. We've got the secret courts, we've got the propaganda, and now we're going to bring in unvetted people from overseas to become part of the police. Are these people going to be loyal to the Queen, the Constitution and the British public? We don't think so. We think they are simply going to be loyal to whoever pays them, which will probably be Ken Clarke. How can we sort of see what's going on? Well, this is the head of Greater Manchester Police, Peter Fahey, and he's been complaining that there's not enough diversity in the police, and that for the British police to do their job properly, we need more people from overseas in the police force. Here he is, of course, waxing lyrical on being a leader with Common Purpose, but he gives it away in the video clip on the Common Purpose site because he says, I think we all live in partnership meetings. Well, we feel the problem with Greater Manchester Police is that they do live in partnership meetings instead of getting out there and doing the policing job. The Jerusalem Post is doing a little bit of stirring here, running an article on Muslims patrolling and stalking the streets of London. Now, we're perfectly well aware that this has been going on, and we can assure you that UK Column Live does not approve of so-called vigilantes policing the streets. But the important thing here is that the focus is being put on the Muslims and is not being focused on what David Cameron and the European Union are up to by breaking down border controls. The Taliban, Afghanistan, still going strong. And the important thing about this article is that we're finally beginning to see that things are not going well. As the army pulls out, of course, the Taliban are able to be more aggressive. But it's very interesting, the level of knowledge in Afghanistan. If I just bring up this text from the article, this is one of the security experts from Afghanistan, Mr. Saleh, is warning that despite the recent focus on North Africa, the continuing al-Qaeda threat from Afghanistan should not be ignored. And then he comes up with some very, very important critical information. A lot of Western analysts now say al-Qaeda's main base is no longer Afghanistan. It's maybe Mali or maybe Somalia. It's maybe North Africa, or maybe it's a sleeping cell in some corner of Europe. And what this gentleman is picking up on, of course, is that we are being told a pack of lies about the international terrorist group Al-Qaeda, who seem to pop up wherever the government need another crisis. So well done the Afghanis for sussing that one out. The Iranians have also, of course, come into the news. They're being particularly aggressive, apparently, by arresting individuals from the press. and they've come out with a statement which I'm afraid we have to agree with. Iran has in recent years denounced the BBC's Persian service and Voice of America, describing them as arms of British and US intelligence agencies. And certainly with the propaganda coming out of the BBC in the UK at the moment, it's fairly easy to say that something fairly nasty is going on with the BBC and their overseas broadcast. But we've covered some of that in the UK column. Over the weekend, we've also had the BBC giving us an update on the French army's success in invading Timbuktu. And of course, while this is tragic in that real people are dying and being injured and maimed as a result of the latest French and British incursion in North Africa, we just would like to highlight, if we take a few pictures of Timbuktu, that we're not looking about a massive, we're not looking at an attack on a fortified city in the desert. Timbuktu's got a population of roughly 56,000, mainly of mud-built buildings, and against that we now have the full force of the French armed forces supported by the British military. So well done, Mr. Cameron. But of course maybe Al-Qaeda is hiding themselves in Timbuktu, but they could be in Mali, or they could be in Somalia,
or they could be here, in fact.
Or they could be here in Plymouth.
Yeah.
What's happening in Syria?
Well, this is, I believe, more similar to other articles that we've mentioned today. This is more sort of pushing the agenda, more spin. Clearly there is a serious refugee crisis in Syria as a result of our supporting al-Qaeda terrorists in Syria. But this article saying that it's potentially much worse than even the United Nations is saying. And really what I believe is going on here is that we're getting people used to the idea that this humanitarian crisis is getting to such a state that we're going to have to step in at some point in the not too distant future. So that's what I think that article's about.
Yeah, and we had a little bit of a heads up over the weekend that it's being alleged that British security companies have got a foot in the door at the moment, and there's some question of munitions being deposited as if to blame it on incriminate the Sadat regime. But we're only getting some initial reports through on that, but it wouldn't surprise us as if we got some of these defence companies who are making big money out of essentially trying to undermine the legitimate Syrian government.
Well, the Arab Spring's going well, and as we can see, not only have we got trouble in Syria and the whole of North Africa, but now Egypt is blowing up again and Morsi is losing control. He's now declared a state of emergency in 3 cities, and it's allegedly going to be a 1-month state of emergency, but I don't think we believe that. These are around the Suez Canal, so a very strategically important part of the country. So, you know, this is a gang counter gang kind of operation going on in Egypt, and I wonder who would be behind that.
Well, I don't know, but of course Mr. Mr. Cameron visited with his arms dealers, so presumably you'd like a little bit of insurgency to help the arms sales.
Yeah, so I mean that's just another one from Yahoo this time showing the same story. Okay, moving on, financial stuff then. Sorry, excuse my throat. 5 smaller banks hope that they can woo private capital. This is from Greece. And basically what we've got here is the Greek central bank has said that smaller Greek banks are required to hold a certain proportion of capital in reserve. If they don't have it, they need to get it from somewhere. And so really these 5 smaller banks, at a time when Greece is already collapsing as a result of lack of capital in the country, these smaller banks have to somehow raise money to stick in a bank account somewhere with the Greek central bank. So this looks to me like the big banks really attempting to shut down the smaller banks.
Right.
And of course, in the meantime, we have real human beings that are continuing to suffer in Greece, and particularly Greece and Spain, in fact. And so we've got continuing strikes going on in Greece. This time, electricity union workers in support of transport workers, but also in Spain. Now, this is clearly in Spanish, but basically what this article is saying is that various social protest groups, the Indignados and various other ones, have combined together under a single sort of banner calling themselves Maria. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. I do apologise. And basically they are going to have national strikes on the 23rd of February.
Right.
So this stuff is not going away in Spain and in Greece. These two countries in particular are suffering worst from the global austerity.
But Mr Cameron and Mr Blair and Mr Clegg would like us to join in this organisation fully. So we've got chaos, we've got the strikes, we've got the riots, we've got the collapse of the euro, we've got the unemployment. Welcome to the Tory party. Let's get further into it.
In the EU agenda,
yeah.
Indeed. Well, we're just going to focus on Mr Osborne for a little bit because really he does need some focusing. So here we've got him warning us over economic hard choices that Britain has to make. And I think this is the latest in a sort of tit-for-tat spat that's going on between Osborne and the IMF. If you remember, last week the IMF warned that Osborne needed to back off his austerity plans because if he didn't, he was going to destroy the British economy. He came straight back and said there was no way that he was going to back off Britain's austerity plans, and in fact he's going on to say now Britain cannot run away from the hard choices that it faces on the economy. And he's saying that, in light of Britain's negative growth, we're heading towards what they're calling a triple dip recession, that really he needs to keep right on ahead with the austerity plans, and there we go. So in the meantime, he's also come out and said that he is not going to change the Bank of England's requirement to meet an inflation target. After all, this came out of the new head of the Bank of England, who starts in the summer, Mark Carney, a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, said that really that we had to be a bit more flexible on our inflation targets, and Osborne's saying no, I think we won't really go too far with that.
So it's getting a bit confused as to who's in control at the moment.
Well, indeed, that's exactly correct. So, and if we go on to the next one then, but it's okay because he's quite happy to impose legislation on everybody which suits his particular family business. So this is copyright legislation that's coming in, that he's bringing in, which will have a beneficial effect on the profits of his family wallpaper business.
Yeah, well, that must just be a coincidence.
Just a coincidence,
yeah.
Yes, indeed. In the meantime, while Osborne is doing nothing about the banks and doing nothing about our economy, the Financial Services Authority is also doing nothing about the banks. So this is, if you remember, one of the scandals other than LIBOR and other than the personal protection insurance mis-selling. The other really big scandal that really hasn't had enough coverage, I believe, was this interest rate swaps mis-selling. And basically what happened was that businesses that went to the banks for loans were offered a special kind of insurance, which was actually a very particular type of derivatives contract that the average businessman would not
want to get involved. High risk.
Absolutely high risk. They absolutely got stuffed by them. Lots and lots of employers in this country are suffering because they're having to service this interest rate swap. The banks were caught in the fraud, and the banks are refusing to pay back because, there is a major concern that, in fact, and the quote in the Telegraph today was that the government is concerned that successful claims would, quote, blow a hole in bank balance sheets.
Right.
So banks are already bankrupt. They are really very, very scared of this one because if people start winning the claims on these interest rate swap deals, the banks who are already more or less bankrupt, it could actually send them right over the cliff.
Yeah, but of course, if you've got your banking chums working closely in the Quad, so JP Morgan's got influence inside that key decision-making part of government, which we've just gone through, then of course you can influence this, and we're not likely to see these people in court or in prison.
Well, that's absolutely right. So this article was about the Federation of Small Business criticising the FSA for not doing enough on this issue. Right. And then one day later we have articles like this, and we've had it in the Telegraph and other places, saying that the Treasury is actually putting pressure on the FSA not to prosecute these people and not to push this. So the Federation of Small Businesses is recognising absolutely that small business, the employers in this country of ordinary people, are suffering badly from this problem, but the Treasury wants to protect the banks, and that's all the Treasury cares about is the banks. So that's that one. Okay. So UK redundancy payouts reached a record £5 billion. This is in the Telegraph. Britain's employers shelled out a record £5 billion in redundancy payments last year, as both public and private sector workforces shed thousands of staff, new figures show. What the Telegraph goes on to say is that UK organisations have paid out £18.4 billion in redundancy payments since the start of the recession. And really the key point here, I think, is that in order to qualify for redundancy payments, you need to be in a sort of a reasonably high quality job. You need to be full-time employment, have worked for a long period of time. If this amount of money is being paid out in redundancy payments, then I think it is a reflection of the absolute decimation of our jobs scene, really. And all these people, of course, what kind of jobs are they going to get and to replace the ones that have been thrown out of?
Shelf stacking.
Coffee serving?
Yeah.
What can you say? Okay, I want to thank John for sending this one, but this is absolutely amazing situation. We've got a report here from the Public and Commercial Services Union talking about the universal credit. And I just wanted to highlight a particular paragraph of this because it's fascinating. The impact on staff as claimants, it says, it is estimated that as many as 40% of the staff working on universal credits will also be entitled to claim universal credits. So what they're saying is that the people that are doling out universal credits, and for those who don't know, universal credits replace things like child tax credit, working tax credit, and the various other tax credits that are out there. So the people that are working on this to hand these credits out to people that are on low incomes are in fact on such low incomes themselves that 40% of those staff will be entitled to universal credits themselves. And this seems like a perfect opportunity for fraud and corruption.
Which is what the government is generating and which we regularly see in councils and public services that are using a lot of common purpose training. We see fraud and corruption. What the government is doing is destabilising the country. They want to collapse Britain as a nation state because we can then be totally subsumed into the corruption of the European Union. It's deliberate.
Just as Osborne, the traitor, is deliberately destroying our economy by continuing with his austerity plans.
And selling off public assets to private companies. So anybody who says, well, it's incompetence, it isn't incompetence. The government knows exactly what they're doing. And of course, the government is now a one-party state with the Lib Dems and Mr. Clegg and Tony Blair and his cronies still involved.
Yeah.
In the background, we watch the global military industrial complex at work.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So Lockheed Martin is investing its fighting spirit in Britain by securing major contracts. So the US defence giant, according to the Telegraph, is seeking to grow its UK base, while British defence companies are busy trying to build up their international presence amid shrinking domestic budgets. US giant Lockheed Martin is counting on the UK. So this seems a bit strange that British defence companies can't get contracts in the UK, so they're having to go elsewhere. In the meantime, foreign defence companies who can't get contracts in their own countries seem to be coming to the UK. Not quite sure how that works. If there's money in the UK for defence contracts, why are they not going to UK companies? But anyway, this article in general I thought was quite amusing because it seemed to me that this was an immediate response to last week's coverage of the fact that the F-35 pictured there is not fit for purpose. If you remember, it's at danger of blowing up if struck by lightning. And this is the aircraft that we're buying in order to replace the Harrier, I believe. So you know, two questions. Is this just a paid-for article, PR article from paid for by Lockheed Martin in order to bum themselves up a bit? But you know, is this the kind of company that really we want to be giving lots of our money to? We gave them the census contract. They've got the contract for air traffic control. So know.
Well, as things are being privatised, of course, they're being put in the hands of not only the banks, but they're being put in the hands of these global industrial military, huge industrial military companies. So this is something which needs to be stopped, and we won't stop it until we deal at the moment with the traitors that we have in Westminster. Talking of the military, we should end on a light-hearted note. The Mirror's picking up here that there's some concerns at the moment about red-headed babies. So the Mirror article here is saying that there's going to be a DNA examination which will be able to tell couples if they're carrying the ginger gene. And I think in the article it says something about 1 in 40 million babies are going to have red hair. I have to say that I had red hair myself originally. That is true, but it seems to have disappeared. But what is the worry over Prince Harry and red-headed babies? I believe they were looking to see whether Kate Middleton might produce a red-headed baby, but we don't quite know how the picture joins up, really.
No.
Okay, so on the subject of redheads, we'll finish there today. Thank you very much for joining us. Keep looking at the information yourself. Don't believe us. Do the research. Check what we say. But what we are watching day by day is the British government attack its own people in order to drag us into a dictatorship. If we allow it to happen, we'll regret it. But we can stop it. Tell a friend. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.